Time for a Dirt Daily, and today is a project that a lot of people dread. I'm going to do some wiring. Wiring doesn't always make the best videos, but it's also good wiring makes for some of the best off-road vehicles, as well as like race cars and street cars. Basically, wiring is pretty important. However, a lot of people are just scared to death to do wiring. Probably 50% of the truck and off-road guys that I know will steer clear of wiring. Like, think about David Freiberger. That guy is a car fanatic. He is a car guru. But if he had to choose between a carburetor that didn't involve any wires or electronic fuel injection that will run no matter which level you're at or what speeds or what hills, steepness or anything like that, he will be like, give me the carburetor. I don't want to mess with the wiring. I don't like the wiring. I don't care about the wiring. I just want the carburetor. I can appreciate that because it's simple, but I also appreciate that if you do your wiring right, things can work awesome. So today I have about 4 or 5 major components that I'm going to wire up, starting with these. These are the AEV off-road lights. In fact, they're already on the Jeep, so this box can go. These lights are already on the Jeep and mounted. However, they have all of this wiring that I have to deal with. Now, this setup is designed so that you basically have a fused wire to the battery. It goes to a relay, then you have a ground, and then you run a long wire through the firewall up to the dash where you have to drill a hole and mount some off-road light switch. Pretty clean and simple. However, I have a different plan for this. Instead of using the AEV harness as it is, I'm going to run it all to an Spod. What is an Spod? An Spod is a switch pod that controls most of your electronic items, accessories on your vehicle. So the way this works is there is a power distribution module, and that module has fuses and relays and low voltage warning. Basically, that module is mounted underneath your hood, powered to your battery, and then you run everything to that. And then on the dash, you just have one little tiny switch panel. And this switch panel is set up so that you can set each switch on it. This one has 6, they also offer one with 8. You can set up each switch to power something. So I'm gonna do off-road lights, front locker, and rear locker. My front and rear lockers are electric lockers. If you had an air compressor and then electric solenoids for air lockers, you could run that off of this. In fact, they come with little stickers that you can put on the switches, and it lists everything. You can run your fuel pump, your line locks, your fan, different lights. Say you have fog lights and rock lights and helmet air. You can run your fridge off of it, your cellular boost, your winch like all of the things that you want to power, you can power off of this. So that is the next thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to install this Spod, and then I'm going to wire the off-road lights into it. I'm going to wire my lockers into it too. I'm just waiting on the wiring harness to show up because much like everybody else, when you're working on a project, there's always something that you forgot to order or it didn't show up or got lost in transit. Like right now, the ring and pinion for my rear axle, lost. The rear tire carrier, lost. The locker wiring, forgot to order. Now it's Sunday, didn't get here. So basically lost. So Spod is going in first, and then we're gonna wire the lights to that. Now, after the Spod, I have 2 more components that I need to wire. One of them is a Rugged Radios radio. This is a GMRS radio that allows you to talk to other people over long distances. It's basically kind of what they call a race radio. Everybody used to use CBs. The race radio technology seems to be better. And we've been using it on a lot of our different off-road adventures. So this is a really cool kit from Rugged Radios that comes with brackets to mount it right kind of down by the passenger's knee. So like where the shifter is, the radio will sit right down there. You can grab it by the mic, or You can hook it up to some headphones and an intercom system. So like if you have the top off and it's really windy or it's noisy and you're bombing along in the desert, you want to talk to your passenger or you want to talk over the radio, you can wear these intercom headsets and talk to each other. Really probably not supposed to wear these on the street because I don't think the law enforcement likes it when you have your ears covered. But you can also tap into these intercom systems with your phone, so you can either make phone calls or listen to music or podcasts or whatever you want to listen to, or YouTube videos where a guy talks about wiring. You could listen to that through your phone, through your headset, through your intercom system, through your Rugged Radios setup. And then finally, the final thing that I'm going to wire today is this. This is the SDI Eclick. This is wiring for my shocks. If you go back, I did a review where I drove a Jeep that had these SDI Eclick shocks on them. And to be honest, when I first drove it, I didn't really get it. But after I had somebody from SDI show up and kind of explain to me how it works and what to do, then it made more sense. Basically what this does is it allows you to adjust the compression dampening when you are driving, and you can change it from basically an on-road setup to an off-road setup. You can firmen up the shocks whether you are going through mountain roads or if you're going fast and you're going to be hitting like whoops. You can make the suspension soak that up better. Or if you're going off-road and rock crawling and you want the suspension to be really flexy, you can adjust all of that through the system for the SDI shocks. This is a little bit more complicated, but both the SDI Eclick shocks and the Rugged Radios system have amazing install videos on the internet. So like the guy that walks you through this SDI Eclick system is actually a buddy of mine named Wayne, and he shoots this video, and it's like, oh, well, that makes it so much easier. Like you try to read an instruction manual, and you're like, I don't really get it. When you watch the videos, whether it's Wayne doing this or my buddy Steve that installs the radio, the videos are super clean, super concise, super simple, and it basically makes it easier for you to understand. In fact, the Spod install, my buddy Tech Tim up in Northridge, he did one on a Gladiator, and I was like, oh, because I was reading the instructions and I had some questions, and then I watched his video and I was like, oh, that makes sense. So we're going to dive right into it. I'm going to start with the Spod, get that mounted up, get the switch panel where I want it, and then I'm going to run the wires from the lights to the Spod. I can delete half of the wiring harness that is currently hooked up to the front off-road lights and just run it straight to the Spod. Then we'll dive into the race radio. I'm not going to give you step-by-steps. Steve does a great job of that. Wayne does a great job of this. I'm just going to do a couple pointers and show you the top of the line things that I think you need to be wary of if you're going to install one of these. And then we'll do the shocks. That'll be last, and hopefully within a couple hours all of this stuff will be buttoned up. Don't be scared of wiring. If you're wiring like really complicated things, I guess I could see how it would be sketchy, but nowadays it's like the harnesses are all set up to bolt right in, especially on a Jeep. Like they make these things to just plug and play on Jeeps. And two, like you watch the video that the companies put out as their instruction manuals, and it's actually pretty helpful. So it's not as easy as like just having a manual right there that you can read, but at the same time, I think it's almost better because you watch the guy do something and you're like, oh, the manual just said run the wire into the dash. And then you watch the video and you're like, oh, he's routing it over this and through that. And then it all works. All right, let's get to work. Speaking of work, I've mounted the Spod right here on the side of the Jeep. It's right underneath the hood. And this thing's cool because instead of running, like say you have the headlights, the off-road lights for the front bumper. Instead of running the wires up to the battery and to a relay and then inside to a switch, you just run the main wires. You get rid of the relay, you get rid of everything going to the battery. You just run the main wires right to this. So here I gutted all of that wiring harness and got it down to 2 wires, positive and negative. And inside of this, there are little terminals, and each one is marked with switch 1 ground, switch 2 ground, switch 3 ground. So I'm just gonna run these 2 wires up here. I'm gonna use switch 3, which when you look at the switch panel, it's probably the farthest one to the right at the top, and that will be what will power the off-road lights. Next, there is a wire harness loom that you have to run inside to wherever you want to put that little switch panel. I'm going to mount it up on top of the dash. Not really sure how yet, but I'm going to figure that part out. But I know that getting this wire to the middle of the top of the dash is kind of the step that I'm at next. And in order to do that, I'm going to lean the windshield forward. I'm going to run it kind of through a hole right here and then up into the cowl and underneath the windshield. There's like a groove under the windshield, and then this will poke out right in the middle of the dash. And then I'll just have to come up with some sort of bracket. I can either screw it right into the dash, which I'm not really too keen on, or maybe build like a little bracket that sits up there, or maybe put a Velcro, double stick Velcro. I'm not really sure. I'm trying to come up with a nice clean system that doesn't leave holes in the dash if I ever want to change it out from the 6 switch up to the 8 switch. The next step is to route this wire inside, and to do that I'm going to lean the windshield forward. There's 4 bolts that hold the windshield to like the roll bar cage, and when you have the hood up and on the strut, you can actually just lay the windshield right on there, which is kind of neat. Wow, there's all types of junk down in here, like trash, a razor blade. Let's throw that right in the trash instead of on the ground. And then I just need to figure out how to get this up to my wiring. And I think it can just kind of poke up through this corner. There we go. There's a nice little slot down in here where you can feed this wire. What are these things? Those pop out? Maybe those are a thing I can bolt to? Ooh, almost stabbed myself in the hand. They do not seem to want to pop out. Ooh, there we go. Yeah. Okay. So that's a little... Yeah, that's kind of neat. You can kind of run your wires up through that. I wonder if I can just mount this to that and then have it snap down in there. That would be nice. Am I gonna like it right there? Let's see. If you're sitting in the driver's seat, is that distracting? Or is that actually pretty good? I think that's probably pretty good. So this is my idea. This little bracket pops into the dash. This bracket holds the switch panel. I'm going to drill 2 holes in this to mount this panel to, and then mount the switch panel to that. That way, if I ever don't like it, I can just replace this thing. This is the left-hand 6GD97TX7AB IB cowl plenum cap. So that's kind of cool. Look at that. It turned out really clean. It doesn't really impede your visibility. It's easy to reach from the steering wheel. It's screwed into a panel that can be replaced. If you don't like it, you want to change it down the road or move it somewhere else. Pretty stoked. Time to bolt the windshield back in and finish the wiring. I have the Spod mounted right here, and I have 2 wires that need to run across to the battery. Now, these can go a lot of different ways, but what I'm finding is that, well, what I'm finding right now is that I let them kind of flop around and they got crazy on me. What I'm finding is that there is a plastic channel across the firewall, and if you can pop it open, it's full of wires, which is great because that means that we can run these main power and ground wires right through that. Now, it's a little tricky to get it opened, and then you have to remove the radiator reservoir, but then you can kind of feed this in there, and it's a clean install. It's kind of tucked away, and there's already other wires in there, so it's protected. And this is going to basically go across to the battery, power and ground, and power up the distribution box of the Spod. I really like this setup with the plastic kind of trough back there. Right here, right at the battery positive terminal for the Spod, there is a big 100 amp fuse. So that is what you need to look for if all of a sudden everything stops working. And my ground wire is a little bit short. So what I'm going to do is, instead of hooking it up to the battery direct, I'm going to use one of these ground spots right here on the frame, or not the frame, on the body where the ground wire runs to the body and bolts in. I'm going to bring this 100 amp, instead of running it out and mounting it over here, I'm going to bring it up on this side and mount it. I could mount it to this. That would work pretty good. Yeah. The Spod's installed. I still need to install the wiring for the front and rear lockers once I get those wiring harnesses here, but it's really simple. They can just run up in here. The other thing that you can do is you have these sticker packets to label all of the switches, but you can also label the lid of the Spod so that you know which switch or which wire is going to what. So I'm going to put this right here. Bumper light for switch number 3, and then if I have any issues and I want to disconnect it or move it, I know that that is, those wires coming in go to that. Eventually I'll have at least 2 more wires coming in here going for the front and rear lockers, and then maybe more on the other side. I can have up to 6 circuits on this one, and I think they offer another one that has 8. Check it out. The off-road lights are on. The red light is lit up. Hit that button again. The off-road lights go off. Hit the top 2 buttons simultaneously, and the back lights go out. So that way you don't have these lights lit up in front of you if you're driving at night and you don't want everything on. The next part of the day of wiring is the radio. In here on the passenger side, you can see the radio mount. I've already installed it. It's super simple. There's basically a bolt that bolts it to the side of the center console, and then some bracketry to hold it in place. This is a really convenient spot for the driver and the passenger. Either of you can reach it and adjust the radio or tune in the different settings. It does hinder the passenger seat sliding all the way forward if you do like the flip and tumble. In that case, you might want to come up with some sort of roof mount or ceiling mount or something up above the windshield, but I think for the trip that I'm going on, this will be perfect. Next, we have to run the wiring to it from underneath the hood. This new Wrangler has a couple spots in the firewall right next to the brake booster where you can run wiring through the firewall. The top hole there has a plug that I've already popped out. The bottom one here has a grommet in it that you can drill through and use. We'll probably use that later, but for now, I've already popped that plug out. The next step, we're gonna run the power cord and the antenna cord through that hole in the firewall into the radio. Rugged Radio has included a grommet that's all the way already on the wires. So you just pull all that wiring through until you get to this grommet and then pop this grommet into that hole in the firewall. Once you get the wires through the dash, I have two other wires on this side. This is the main power that you're gonna run over to the battery. And like the wiring that we did for the Spod, I'm gonna run it through that track that hides underneath the radiator overflow tank. And then there's another piece that comes out here and it uses a bracket that Rugged Radios supplies. And this is the coax for your antenna. So you're gonna bolt this to the side of the Jeep using one of the already threaded holes. There's a rubber washer that goes behind it. And then you will screw this together here and then route everything nice and tight. The hood won't pinch it if it's back in this corner. And then we can put the antenna right on there. Next, you'll bring the antenna and it will bolt right on here. I believe it will bolt right on there. There it goes. You got to press down on it a little bit. Turn that to about finger tight and you should be good to go. The next step is to install the radio power and antenna coax to the back of the radio, which is on the passenger side. So even though these wires came through from the driver's side of the dash of the firewall, now you're gonna route them underneath the center console, and there's like an easy little clip to pull the carpet away, and then these will just kind of route underneath the center console and come out on the other side. You don't want to ever take your antenna coax and like just spiral it up if you have too much. That's why it's really convenient that this kit has the perfect length for the Jeep. If you have excess antenna wire coax on some other custom project you're building, make sure that you run it out and back and not spooled up, because when you wrap it up, it messes up with the antenna working and it basically forms like another antenna, which isn't good for your radio. Those will feed through there, and then all of this will get zip tied up to this kind of cross member. I'm gonna go to the other side and plug it in. Once we have the radio installed, the last step is to install the power. Now, unlike a lot of accessories, radios can be really touchy when it comes to clean power. So the best thing to do is run the power and ground directly to the battery. Don't hook it up to the starter or a ground on the body or the dash or the firewall. Just get those wires all the way to the battery and you'll have the best use of a radio that you could think of. Perfect. This radio is already pre-programmed. You can go to Rugged and tell them which programs you want, which channels. I have certain channels that I run with my buddies when we go four-wheeling, so this thing's ready to go. I'm gonna install the intercom system really quick, and then I think the next thing we need to step onto is the Eclick shocks. Started moving forward on the shocks. These SDI Eclicks have a ECU that I mounted right to the top of the fuse box as per instructed. And then they also have an IMU, which is mounted right up here in the middle of the cowl. Next, I ran wires. I ran wires from here over to there and wires from there over to here. And I just about maxed out this plastic container that Jeep offers to put all the wires in. But I think I have just enough space inside there to clip it all closed. Oh boy, because now it has the wires for the shocks, the wires for the Spod, the wires for the radio. Come on, this is the last clip. Just clip together, just clip shut so we can go on with our lives. Silly plastic wiring thing. Yay! All right. There's a lot of wires running in there, but they are all protected, which is nice. I have a few plugs here that will plug into the different wires coming out of here. You kind of have to read all the instructions. And then there's a wire that runs down to the front shock. There's also a wire that runs down to the back shock. Oh, the big problem was the shock wiring harness has a grommet to go through that hole, the same hole that the radio wires went through that also had a grommet. So then I had to figure out, could I fit the wires from the shocks through the radio grommet or vice versa? It turned out I had to delete the radio grommet, kind of modify the grommet a little bit for the shocks so I could get the antenna wire and the power wire for the radio through the same grommet. It got a little hectic there. I may have said a few P's and Q's, but at the end of it, all of them are going through the grommet and the grommet is in place. I did have to completely unwire the radio and antenna and pull it all back through and then back through, but now everything is through one grommet and it looks nice, which is an interesting concept. Like a lot of these companies are going to want to use that one hole to put their wires through and their grommets. So you kind of have to think about, all right, is there a way to make a grommet that maybe you can put a lot of things through, but it still seals up nice? Because you don't want a bunch of wind noise or water and stuff coming through that hole in the wall, in the firewall. So there you go. There's something for you smart kids in America to invent. Next, we're going to plug in this IMU thing. Don't forget the little safety lock. The ECU is already plugged in. I have to figure out some wires here, and then all I have left to do on this is run the wires down the frame rail and to the back for the back two shocks. Coming together. This is the shift knob that comes with the SDI Eclick system. This is the factory one. So it's about twice as big, but the reason for that is because the top of this is basically the touch screen that controls all of the shocks. It allows you to adjust them from firm to street to off-road, whatever the settings are, they're all based right in this touch screen. And the outside perimeter of it has a dial that turns. So what I had to do was take this whole shifter segment apart and then replace it with this knob that comes from with the Eclick shocks. And then run the wires down inside of the center console, and then I'm going to just bolt this back together and run the wires up underneath the dash and lock everything in place. It's all coming together. It's just a bunch of little steps. Like when you watch the video, the shift boot just pops right off. And then when I was doing it on mine, it turned out that the part of the shift boot was like glued to the bottom part of the shifter. So I had to like tear it apart, and then it wasn't big enough to fit the wiring. So I had to cut it a little bit. So it looks all right for now, I think. I think the next thing left to do is just make sure everything's zip tied up safely. Oh, there is a plug over here that plugs right into the OBD2 sensor or OBD2 port, and that is how the ECU from the Eclick shocks talks to the ECU of the Jeep and kind of learns things like how is my steering pointed and all of that. So it'll definitely be a little bit of a learning experience to get everything dialed in. The final step for the SDI Eclick shocks is just to hook these plugs into each shock. Each one is labeled. This is FL for front left, and that will just plug in there with a nice click. All of these wires are going to want to be routed up, but the top of the shock doesn't move a lot. You're going to want a little bit of flexibility here, but it's not like it's swinging like 12 inches. It barely moves a couple inches if at that. So make sure all of those are plugged in. The next thing I'm going to do is raise it up and run the wires to the back so that I can button up the rear shocks. But that's pretty much it for today's Dirt Daily. I wired in the Spod, I wired in the off-road lights, I wired in the radio, I wired in the Eclick shocks, and everything is just about dialed. I do have to do a little bit of tuning on the shocks once the controller is set up and then the vehicle's sitting on level ground. You have to kind of fine tune the IMU. So that's going to happen after I get all the suspension and the rear tires and the tires and wheels on everything. But overall, it was a good day. I felt like it was very productive and I got all the things done. And it turned out really clean. I really like having the option of the grommets and the holes already in the firewall, as well as that plastic track that runs across the back of the engine bay. And you can put all those wires in there and then clip it shut tight and it looks nice and clean. All right, that's it. We'll see you guys next time.